Hello, I'm Bill Leopold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me today is Susan Engelhardt, Executive Director of CIVET at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
First thing on our mind is CIVET. What is CIVET? What's the center, and what does CIVET stand for?
CIVET stands for the Center for Innovative Ventures of Emerging Technologies. And we were founded back in 2006, actually at the end of 2006. So we're about 3.5 years young at this point.
Okay.
And we were founded really to help support commercialization on Rutgers campuses. We had a little bit of impetus. At the end of 2005, the School of Engineering, specifically biomedical engineering, was awarded a grant from the Wallace Coulter Foundation.
Okay.
And Wallace Coulter traditionally tries to encourage the translation of research to benefit society. So the research shouldn't just sit there, it should be translatable, it should make that journey. And as part of the feedback from the Coulter grant, we understood from them that they felt our research was a bit too complex. Perhaps it wasn't digestible by industry. And in addition, they felt that the development of the intellectual property for the research was somewhat reactive. So these were two comments amongst other comments that you typically get when you propose a grant and so on. We were awarded the grant, but we took that feedback very seriously. And we said, there is support on campus. There's the Office for Technology Commercialization, OTC, on campus that works with the researchers to help them commercialize their technology, but maybe we need a little bit of a boost. Maybe we need to work with those researchers ahead of time, before their research, their disclosures and so on reach the OTC, and help them to make sure that that journey is going to be successful. So we formed CIVET, and when I say 3.5 years young, I mean that in all seriousness, because it's a journey. It's a culture change on campus. Many of the other universities are doing it. Rutgers fully expects to be leading edge in this, in the area of commercialization within the next 5 years, and we are working very hard to make sure that that happens.
A lot of our viewers, including me, don't understand in terms of the commercialization process. So I know for a faculty member who's in the midst of developing stuff, being able to do intellectual property, that may come second nature in some ways, especially with your help. So can you kind of help us how we do that, or how you help those faculty members?
Excellent point. Excellent point. And what you said was very telling. The faculty members don't necessarily understand it either, and that's where we come in. So our mission, and I'm going to say our shared mission, because CIVET is not the only organization on campus that works with commercialization. Our shared mission overall is to educate the faculty member initially as to what is commercialization, what is this process? I'm used to doing research in my lab, maybe it has applicability in industry, maybe not. How do I navigate the process? To enable that researcher to be able to tweak or orient their research so that it is commercializable, and to be able to translate that research to industry. Now again, a lot of big words. Research has its place there's basic research and there's applied research. If you're going to be doing applied research, you need to understand things like, if you're going to commercialize it, what does the market look like? Is this product going to be disruptive? Is it going to earn enough money? Are there going to be interested parties in the market for this particular piece of industry? How do I protect my intellectual property? The academic environment is so steeped in publications and posters and let's get our research out there. Well, if you're going to be commercializing it, you need to think about what your protection strategy is. Things like, how do I build a management team if I'm going to be, well, before that even, what is my exit strategy? Am I going to be licensing this technology, or is it better to start a new company? Is it better then to take perhaps my technology and sell it to an existing company? So things like that, the faculty member doesn't necessarily understand that process. And the mission of CIVET and other supporting organizations on campus is to educate, first and foremost to educate the researcher or the faculty member and how to do that and how to make sure it's successful.
From my perspective, what you're talking about is you're really that kind of faculty mentor.
Yes.
You're the mentor to the faculty to say, wait a second, have you thought about these questions? Have you thought about your audience? This is a great product, but if you're going to commercialize it, how many folks are out there? What's it going to be worth to you?
100%. And what's interesting is that if you took the process and you fast-forwarded to the end, and you said, oh God, you know, if I only had known that. If I only realized that the market was facing this way, and if I would have tweaked my research a little bit 5 degrees to the right or to the left, it would have fit. Instead of building a square peg and trying to fit it into a round hole at the end, why not build a square peg and know that it's going to fit in a square hole?
So I'm going to ask some strange questions at this point.
Sure.
It sounds to me like you're helping them do some market research, or at least getting them the ability to get to some market research.
Right.
And two, it also sounds to me like you're helping them to translate some of the academic component of their research.
Yes, absolutely.
So it becomes not just their academic language, but their language in terms of being able to meet up with either a funder or someplace else.
100%. It is it's an interesting three-legged stool, I would say. There's the technology, there's the engineering piece of it, and the science.
Right.
There's the business aspect, and there's the legal aspect. And specifically, one of the things I wanted to mention in terms of the programming is we're teaching the students as well. It's not just focused on the faculty member.
Okay.
It is our responsibility as Rutgers, you know, as part of Rutgers University, to educate the next generation of entrepreneurs. And so specifically, CIVET offers a class called Innovation and Entrepreneurship for Science and Technology. And it's aimed at the engineering student, both the mature undergraduate, in other words, the advanced undergraduate, the junior, senior undergraduate students, and graduates, open to graduate students as well.
Okay.
And in that class, we do exactly that. We teach these engineering students how to speak the language of business. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, was our final pitch exercise, where all the concepts that they've learned throughout the entire class were brought together in one final pitch, that a 10 to 12-minute presentation that they made to actual venture capitalists, actual entrepreneurs. And frankly, I sat there and I was amazed. I was so impressed that these students, to whom these business concepts were foreign at the beginning of class, were able to knit it together in such a way that it was understandable.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because
Sure.
a lot of our viewers will perceive engineer students as focused on numbers, focused on lines, focused on concepts, and focused in a language that most of us don't understand. It sounds to me like this class really challenges them to think a little differently in terms of how they have that happen.
It does.
And it sounds to me like that for you got that kind of perspective yesterday.
We're turning them into Renaissance students. They're allowed one slide on the technology.
Okay.
It need not be point size 2.
Okay.
It need, you know, and it has to be presented in such a way that is understood by the VC audience, the venture capitalist audience. So, yes, and at the same time, for the faculty, we offer different kinds of programming as well. One of the things that we do that's actually just rolling out across all campuses, but something we call the Innovation Sounding Board. What happened traditionally with these researchers is that they would conduct their research, get to a point where they said, you know, I think this might have industrial application. I'm going to go to the Office for Technology Commercialization. I'm going to disclose it. I'm going to do whatever I need to do. And then perhaps they would be matched up with potential investors. And if the answer was no, because the technology wasn't mature enough, or it just wasn't a strategic fit, or what have you, they'd go back to their offices and wait for the next phone call. We're trying to change all of that in that we offer summits as well, where we have venture capitalists and investors come in and listen to the researchers present their technology. But it's more of an intimate kind of an interaction, where generally it's MIT actually at the Deshpande Center started this practice, where you would have various different investors in a room. I mean, I picture a smoky room where they're, you know, and they've got fever pitches going on. So you've got 3 minutes to get up there and tell the person and convince them and tell them why it's so wonderful that they should invest in your technology. And then it was a toggle. If the answer was no, it was no. You went back to your office and you waited. Right. We're trying to change that by creating these summits that are hosted by CIVET, and the audience for us are venture capitalists that are friendly. I shouldn't say that most of them aren't, but that are working with CIVET to help educate the faculty. So, for example,
so it's a partnership with them.
The last one, exactly. The last one that we hosted, and the next one as well, will be with New Jersey Jumpstart, which is a consortium of about 40 or so angel investors that are working with Rutgers to help to educate that faculty. So the faculty member gets up, we help them prepare a presentation that's about, you know, 10 slides or so, and what happens after that is the New Jersey Jumpstart investors provide advice to that faculty member. And if there is actionable, if there's something that we need to follow up with, we will refer them to what we call the Innovation Sounding Board, which is a consortium of about 40 or 50 experts in various fields. So whether you're inventing something in the area of alternative energy, a medical device, a smart system, what have you, whether you need advice in the area of business, marketing and things of that nature, or legal protection or regulatory process, we refer these researchers to the ISB, and through a social network that we've set up, they can continually get advice.
So in some ways, I'm going to use one of those kind of paradigms. It sounds to me as though you're kind of doing some matchmaking in some ways.
Yes.
The matchmaking in terms of being able to introduce and then be able to help cultivate relationships.
Correct.
Provide feedback on both areas and then be able to kind of see what works.
And on top of that, build a process. It's very hard for the researcher to navigate their way through this process. Where do I start? When do I start? Do I have to keep a lab notebook? Why? What does that mean? When should I protect my IP? Should I do perhaps a patent search up front to find out what the landscape looks like? We're actually building a process that takes the researcher from the actual research before the aha happens, all the way to commercialization, and is supported by that ISB that I just mentioned, is supported by a social network that allows them to get advice as they're going through the process.
I know you're only 3 years old, or 3 years young, as you talk about.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the major successes that you've had?
Absolutely.
It sounds to me the summits are part of that success. It sounds to me as though the class is part of that success.
Yes.
But can we talk about, the professor and kind of learning and kind of going through that process?
Sure. And I don't want to get into specifics of any particular person's intellectual property,
Absolutely.
But some of the examples that I can recall are helping a professor through the regulatory process. They're developing a software application that fits into, I don't know, is it diagnostic? It's in the medical arena. Is it diagnostic? Is it a medical device, so to speak? Where does that fit in terms of the regulatory process? Do I have to go through full FDA approval? Where do I go with that? So we've worked with researchers to help them navigate their way through that, so it's not a surprise at the end where they're sitting in front of a venture capitalist and they say, well, did you know that that's going to take 3 years to get through the FDA? Rather, ahead of time, start to prepare that strategy. We've also worked with researchers to help them to hone in and focus on a particular product. Oftentimes there's a technology that can be applied to so many different areas. What's the best one? Pick one, stick with it, move forward. You can always apply it to things later on once it's, to additional things once it's successful. But just equally as important is sometimes working with the researchers to help them understand that it's not going to be commercializable. I did a lot of consulting in my prior life, and one of the things one of the expressions that I really loved was, if you can't say yes, please say no. Very often you have researchers that are working to commercialize their innovation. The market is saturated. The protection is not there because they've presented at conferences, what have you, and they don't know. They don't realize that. So sometimes it's really to help them to get to a no.
So it's really that honesty in terms of helping them understand that.
Exactly.
Listen, it sounds like CIVET is doing some great work. I would love to have you back to talk more about some of the other successes that CIVET's doing and kind of the growth in the next few years.
I would welcome that.
I appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back in a few moments. Joining me is Indrani Chatterjee, Associate Professor of History at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Dr. Chatterjee, welcome.
Thank you so much.
For our viewers, you do a lot of research in South Asia. Can you talk to us about what countries make up the South Asia area in terms of what you do your research in?
Yes, of course. As everyone knows, it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. Currently, of course, we also, but in the past, we included Afghanistan and Burma in the study of South Asia. So when we're teaching South Asian history, we teach all of those.
Our country, in terms of the U.S., knows a lot about some of the things that are there, or some of the countries that are there, or some of the cultures, just based upon politically kind of where we are. But I'm not so sure we know a lot about the countries that are there, the other cultures. Why is it important for us globally to understand that region of the world?
Right now, of course, economically, it makes a very good sense for people in business, people in politics, diplomacy, to know about that region. All of us have been affected by 9/11, and Afghanistan's history is tied up with Pakistan as well as with India and the larger subcontinent as a whole. So we must know about that region wherever we are, whether it's an ordinary person in the state of New Jersey or somebody going into government, law, business. We must know.
A lot of your research that you've done is focused on the history of slavery in South Asia. For our viewers who might only understand the American context of slavery, can you kind of delve in a little bit to your research and kind of what you've been able to discover or what you found?
Thank you. That's a very important question. Actually, because it's about a larger society which conceived of itself in terms of relationships, in terms of attachments. And so laying out the series of attachments, political, economic, social ramifications of those attachments, then allows us to insert what people were doing in terms of buying women and children or taking orphans created by natural disasters, financial or famines, disasters of different kinds, and incorporating them into big structures such as households or into militias. And so getting the young boys very early, training them in different capacities, like soldiers, like scribes very often. And the women would be incorporated into service networks of different kinds, like nurses, nursemaids, servants of different groups. Sometimes, if they were very successful, these women would also be married into the extended kin group of the holders or the lineage holders. So we have a very different kind of pattern emerging in the period before the 19th century in terms of what we identify as slaves. So it's a different kind of slaving. It's not as brutalized. It's not as severe. It is not as demeaning and degrading as the plantation use of such beings then becomes in the 19th and 20th century. Well, in the 19th century mainly, but of course we are talking about, you know, its effects in North America for a very much longer period. I think old world systems, Central Asian, South Asian, and old East Asian, Chinese and other Southeast Asian systems, are much more like each other in this kind of adaptive, incorporative kind of use of people.
One of the things that I think that there's such a vivid imagery about in the U.S. is the conversation, as you talked about, the brutalization of slaves, the contradiction in terms of skin color, the contradiction in terms of what tasks are put in place, and specifically around the conversation of the black male or the African American male. And so the conversation sounds a little different. Can you talk about that? Because I heard you talk a lot about women, children. I didn't hear a lot about where men fit into that structure in some ways.
Yes, thank you. Well, men in the older world pattern would not be that dishonored. What you are talking about in the North American case with the African male incorporated into the American plantation is a very acute system of dishonor and degradation of the male as much as of the female. But in the older world patterns, what you find is that young boys would grow into skilled men and therefore would not be dishonored in that savage way that we find for the 19th century US. And if there is dishonor, it's a kind of muted dishonor about not having or not knowing your lineage, not knowing your father or grandfather, or having a deep history, which the owners, the buyers, the master group would have or would take pride in. So in that sense, it's a difference between the slave male and the non-slave male, is that the non-slave male would know 3 to 4 generations or more of his ancestors, whereas the slave male may not.
Okay.
But would be able to have other kinds of patrons or sectarian saint links or links to teachers, and that's what makes belonging in a religious lineage very important for slave males as well as for non-slave males. So it's a very different style of honor and dishonor.
One of the things that we look at in terms of because this is an interesting question, perspective.
Yes.
In the U.S., we're displacing folks by taking them from one continent and putting them onto another continent.
Yes.
In the conversation of, like you say, disconnecting in families in some way. When we're looking at South Asia, we're moving folks around within a continent, maybe different countries, maybe different religions, maybe different cultures. But it does. But was there mass migration, mass moving of folks, as there was in the U.S.?
Yes, there was, but under very different conditions. It wasn't, always this degraded in the sense that there were, we can see, for instance, very early on, we can see there is epigraphic evidence of 6,000 people being moved from one area to another. But we don't know exactly from which area, because we cannot pin down those old Sanskritic names to particular geographical terrains all the time.
Okay.
So what we do have is this epigraphic evidence or mention of 6,000 Hunas or Yavanas or whatever, but they're being situated within a particular religious group or territory that belongs to a brotherhood, a religious brotherhood, and they're given statuses of different kinds. The evidence seems to show that provisions are made for their religious well-being, for their subsistence. They're all given tiny plots of land, but they're settled in that way. And remember that South Asia, for the period that I'm looking at, still has enormous amounts of lands which are not cultivated.
Right.
So we are not looking or imagining a heavily populated terrain as it is today. That region is heavily populated today. But it was not so always, at least not till the end of the 18th century. So.
A lot of your conversation involved the idea of religion in slavery.
Yes.
Again, can you draw a contradiction to the U.S.? Because the U.S. has a very spiritual kind of context in terms of survival. In terms of when you're looking at a slave in terms of kind of what the ritual was about, what their conversation and religion was about. It sounds to me as though in South Asia, there was an honoring of some of that religion and kind of allowing a person who might be a slave to practice the religion and to honor the religion in a very different way than the North American context.
Yes, of course. That's where South Asia is, and South Asian history is so intriguing and so different from what happens in the US. The South Asian past has been that of this entire subcontinent has been settled by numerous groups of different people coming from, and we have, evidence from the Upper Paleolithic period onwards of settlements of various kinds. So this has been a terrain that's been settled right from the start from very, very different groups of people, bringing in multiple religious practices, icons, and they're all there in the evidence right there. So divisions have not been along religious lines.
Okay.
Okay. And therefore, providing for newcomers and their religions is part of the larger provision that is made by any patron or master or anybody who's bringing in people to work, to live there, has to make provision for their ritual practices.
Okay.
Because that is what distinguishes one group of people from another group of people. And it's not about skin color.
Okay.
And so you can tell
Yes.
differences only by ritual practice. You cannot tell differences by looking at people.
I want to talk a little bit about your academic department. You serve in 2 different departments. You serve in the South Asia Studies Department as well as in the History Department. Can you kind of describe to us what the South Asia Studies Department is about and kind of how it's flourished?
Well, South Asian Studies is not quite a department right now, it's a program. And, but you're right, I served for long years in a secondary capacity as a consulting member for the AMISOL department, which was set up very recently, which is the African, Middle East, and South Asian Literatures and Languages Department. And they are now a growing department. But my primary focus was, and belonging is in the History Department. The South Asian Studies program currently, we began in 2003, were incorporated in 2004, and we offer courses for undergraduates for their minor, which means that they have to take a minimum of 6 courses for 3 credits to get 18 credits in total. And they have to spread their courses out. Over 4 years, 18 credits is not a small thing.
Right.
But they get it.
Good.
And we have a growing body of people doing
And your students on the web, lots of students, lots of testimonials are saying they're having a great time in the department, they're learning a great deal, and they're also finding great faculty mentors. Lots of folks who identify as South Asian on the web who are talking about the fact that they have a connection. In ways that they have not had it before.
Oh, wow.
So,
thank you.
The student testimonials are amazing throughout the different parts of the university. So
that's fantastic.
It's great.
Well, thank you for mentioning that because the undergraduate school, the SAS just gave me an award for distinguished contribution to undergraduate education. So I'm very
congratulations. And your students speak highly of you. So
thank you.
We want to thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So
thank you so much.
Well, that's all we have for this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. For more information about any of the subject we've discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thanks for watching.